Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. Let me say from the very beginning, let me emphasize something from the very beginning. 2 years ago, we founded the Mario Center of Political Economy and Business with the ambition to become one of the most important university-based centers in Romania for disseminating economic freedom in general and Austrian economics in particular. And we managed to do it. As we celebrated 1 year of existence only, we were granted one of the most prestigious distinctions, the 2011 Templeton Freedom Awards, in a worldwide competition where there were 183 applications from 40 different countries. As part of our activity from the very beginning, we intend to invite prestigious libertarian thinkers and free market-oriented economists from all over the world in a series of annual lectures. Last year, Professor Jeffrey Meyer from Harvard University accepted our invitation, and so we inaugurated Jeffrey Meyer lectures on liberty. We are very happy that Professor Tyler Cowen accepted to be the 2012 speaker in these lectures. Professor Tyler Cowen is one of the most talented economists in the world, as you know already. A couple of years ago, I saw one statement of an American fellow economist saying that Professor Tyler Cowen is an underappreciated economist. Well, I don't know if this was true at that moment, but in 2011, Tyler Cowen was included in top 100 thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine and was designated as the hottest American economist by Bloomberg Business Week. According to The Economist, Tyler Cowen is one of the most influential economists of the last decade, and his blog, Marginal Revolution, is very widely read. If I were to resume the importance or the relevance of Tyler Cowen's writings for today's economic discussions, I would say this. Half a century ago, Milton Friedman coined the phrase, "We are all Keynesians now." I don't think it's true. Still, I don't think it is true today, and we should change it, perhaps in "we're all marginal revolution readers today." Let me say one more thing before giving the floor to our distinguished speaker this evening. I'm very happy that we can read the Romanian version of his book, Create Your Own Economy, The Path to Prosperity in a Disordered World. And I want to use this opportunity to thank Cultura Publica, and especially Cătălin Muraru and Bogdan Gureanu for their efforts and achievement. They managed to produce this book in a very short time. Ladies and gentlemen, our lecture begins now with Tyler Cowen's talk. Is a great stagnation overtaking the global economy? Let's hear the answer.
I will tell you at the end what I think of Romania, but let me start with the headlines. Let me start with Europe, and then I will look to the broader world, and finally end up with Romania. There's a crisis in the newspapers, even today. Even this morning, there is new news coming out about the global economy. And basically, what is happening is that much of Europe is about to settle into a Great Depression. In percentage terms, this Great Depression may be worse for many countries than the Great Depression of the 1930s. So let me explain why I think this Great Depression is coming and why it illustrates some basic ideas from Austrian economics. Let's start with Greece. Greece is not the only problem, but Greece is one problem. Greece is maybe the problem which is easiest to understand. Ask yourself a simple question. Let's say you're an investor and you have some money. Would you put that money today in a bank in Greece? You could put your euros in a bank in Greece, or you could put your euros in a bank in Germany, or a bank in Switzerland. Which is the better investment? It's a silly question because we all know the answer. You would be wiser to put your euros in a bank in Germany, United States, Switzerland, Romania, for that matter. How many of you here have taken out money right now and invested it in Greece? Probably no one. This is a tribute to your wisdom. But here's the problem. When people realize that a euro in a bank in Greece is unwise, euros leave Greece and they flow to countries such as Germany. And over time, the economy of Greece is drained of its money. Credit collapses, there are pressures for deflation, wealth disappears, people are put out of work. To refer back to Austrian economics, you can think of the original idea of the euro. It was kind of a price-fixing scheme. It's as if a bunch of Europeans got together and decided that they would fix two prices as the same. A euro in a Greek bank account and a euro in a German bank account. That was price fixing. We economists, what is it that we know about price fixing? We know it doesn't work. You end up with shortages, in this case a shortage of money and credit in Greece, and market forces tend to break down and pick apart and pull apart the price control. So what's happening in Greece is that money is fleeing the country. The government is somewhat bankrupt. What can they do? The government decides, well, we will spend less money. Some people like that decision. Some people don't like it. But I would just say this. When you have fixed the most important price in your economy and money is fleeing your economy, credit is collapsing, you could raise government spending, you could cut government spending, you could do whatever you want with it. It's not really going to help. So I predict that within a year, and most likely this summer, when I say within a year, I mean like the short year, not the long year. Most likely, within the course of a year, so many euros will have left Greece that Greece, quite literally, will be empty of money. And its government will wake up one morning and they will have to pay people with pensions. They will have to pay public employees. And there will not be enough euros there to do it. What will they do? They'll pull out a piece of paper, just like this. The government will write on it, we say in English, IOU, a slip of credit, and it will say on it, you know, IOU, postal worker, 300 euros. And you as a postal worker, instead of getting your euros, instead of getting this, you'll get this. How will you feel about that? Well, you might not be happy, but the thing is, you know, a day or two will pass, and everyone will realize that this will not be easily convertible back into this. So this will start trading at a discount. 50%, 60%, no one knows. And a day later, an hour later, people will call this the new drachma. And Greece will have a new currency, the old currency, the drachma. The new drachma, the old drachma, but the drachma. And the euros will be gone. This is what is very likely to happen with Greece. Now, on top of all that, you have other problems, like they ran an election, no one liked the results, so they're going to run it again. Probably the results will not be better, they may be worse. So there's not really a functioning government or a political consensus in Greece. That just causes money to flee the country all the more quickly. So that will happen in Greece, but that is step one. What is step two? People will turn their eyes to Portugal, which is probably the next weakest economy in the Eurozone. Portugal pays a lot of money to borrow. Their government is not solvent. Portuguese banks are extremely weak. Those Portuguese banks, they're backed by the government, right? But if the government is insolvent, how sound is that guarantee? So let's ask that same question. How many of you here would invest your money now in Portuguese banks? It's not like they pay you 15% interest to make up for the risk. The Portuguese economy is shrinking. They can't afford to pay you 15% interest. So just as money is now leaving the banks of Greece, it has been starting to leave the banks of Portugal. And my prediction is that after Greece will come Portugal. Step 3, after Portugal, investors will turn their sights to Italy and Spain. Now it gets trickier, because Italy and Spain, especially Italy, they're much wealthier than either Greece or Portugal. So there's a chance they can survive the financial onslaught. But I'm actually somewhat skeptical. Here's a way to think about it. Let's go back to Greece leaving the Eurozone. Let's say that things for Greece go really well. I doubt that. I'll get back to that. But let's say they go really well. That will just teach all these other countries, you can leave the Eurozone and things will go fine. That means right now, basically euros will leave Spain and Italy. Their borrowing markets, their credit, their businesses will somewhat collapse. They will leave the Eurozone. So if Greece goes well, it actually encourages other countries to leave, and it accelerates this rapid collapse. If Greece doesn't go well, there's a kind of panic effect. Think about why Greece may not go well. Just 2 simple facts about Greece. They import a lot of their food, and they import most of their energy. Those imports, what do they pay for those imports? Do they pay this, or do they pay euros? They pay euros. You want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Do you think the Saudis want this? Not really. If they take it, they'll require so much of it, there's no bargain there. Saudis need to be paid in euros or dollars. So if the scenario is that all this money has left Greece, which is a fear of confiscation, how is it that Greece will pay Saudi Arabia or pay the countries which send it food? So it's a very serious problem. If the hard currency is leaving your country and you import most of your food and fuel, which is the case in Greece, this is a very scary scenario. Extremely scary. Probably it will become the most dramatic, the most frightening piece of economic news that Europe has seen really since World War II, unless you count the wars in Yugoslavia, which are more political events than economic events. So no one really knows exactly how this will go, but when I talk to other economists, at this point, none of them are optimistic. Virtually all of them see some kind of collapse. They disagree as to how many countries it will affect. I know some extreme pessimists who think it will hit France. I tend to disagree with that. But once it gets started, once there's a contagion effect, once there's a kind of panic in capital markets, maybe all the money will flow to the US, Germany, and Switzerland, and then it's truly a dangerous scenario. So that's all the bad news, and it's pretty bad. I wanted to come here and be more optimistic. I think I agreed to come here. When was it? February, March? Earlier in the year. It wasn't quite as bad then. I thought the Europeans had erected some firewalls which could at least delay this logic. But those firewalls have turned out to be very weak. So the European Central Bank, starting in December, lent out about €1 trillion. Not a million, not a billion, €1 trillion. They lent €1 trillion to stop this problem. And they stopped it from December through about April. So when €1 trillion postpones your problems for 3 to 4 months, what should you infer about the size of your problems? Pretty big. Now the title of this talk is about the great stagnation globally. So let's think about the long run for a minute. These are short run problems which I'm talking about. Europe's long-run problem, a lot of it has to do with birth rates. So in virtually all European countries, families are having fewer children. This effect was especially sharp in most of Eastern Europe. Right after communism fell, people were very uncertain. A lot of them, they just postponed the decision. And families ended up having fewer children. But it seems this may be a permanent development. So a country like Italy, by the year approximately 2050, Italy might be half of its current size. Now that may help on traffic jams, but it's not actually good economic news. If Italy is half of its current size, how will they pay for pensions? What will happen to the value of homes? When the value of homes falls, what happens to the solvency of banks? What happens to the level of the Italian stock market when people are retiring and selling to finance their retirement and fewer young people are buying? When you think through all of these implications, there's this worrying risk of a longer-term stagnation in most of Europe, even once one gets past these shorter-term problems. Keep in mind, do not identify the success of the euro with the success of Europe. Very often, France and Germany and Italy, they speak this way, but that's a big mistake. The euro is probably a bad idea to begin with. And even though Europe will see the short-term chaos, it's probably better for Europe if a lot of countries leave the euro. So this is treated as doom and gloom, and it is a problem in the short run. But in many ways, the optimistic scenario is to get it over with and leave the euro now and get on with things. But there's still this longer run problem of demographics. I wrote a book called The Great Stagnation, and one of the key themes of this book is simply that economic growth in a lot of countries seems to be slowing down. So if you look at the United States, our growth slowed down. It starts at about 1973. So before 1973, our growth is very strong. After 1973, we do have some very good years, but we also have a lot of bad years. And overall, our growth is much slower. And a lot of that, I think it has to do with technology. The rate of progress in technology has slowed down. So if you go to America, there's a kind of complacency there. There's even, maybe I would call it a kind of arrogance. Americans think they're so wonderfully innovative. They think they're so on the cutting edge, like they're so smart, they're so great, they're so number one. And of course it is a relatively innovative country. But I think it's startling when you look at the actual record of innovation. So if I take my own life, I'm 50 years old now. So I was born in 1962. And I remember my childhood pretty well. In my childhood, people drove in cars. What do people do now? They drive in cars. When I was a child, people watched TV. People now watch TV. We have better shows, we have more channels, we have TV on the internet, the cars are safer, the music sounds better. There's a lot of progress, but it's small gains, incremental progress. If I turn on a TV show from the 1960s, and I imagine myself back in that TV show, I would know how everything works. I would understand all the technology. It would be familiar to me. I would adapt to that world basically like that. It would take me, I think, not even an hour to figure everything out. Maybe the way you turn on the stove or the oven is a little different. But in fact, I live in a house which was built in the 1950s. My house is considered a pretty nice house. I'm not a billionaire, but it's a nice house. So the newer houses, they're somewhat bigger, but they all have the same stuff. The newer house has a toilet. My older house has a toilet. The newer house has electricity. My older house has electricity. My electricity, it works as well as theirs. The one area where things have changed is like this stuff. Internet, iPhone, cell phones. So communications. In the last 10 years, we've seen massive progress. Everyone notices it. Like big, big changes. And we had nothing like this when I was a kid. I had a walkie-talkie. Maybe you could talk to someone around the block. If You shouted really loud. And now I have this, tremendous. But it's like we're trying to run an economic revolution on one dynamic sector. Now that's my life. Compare it to the life of my grandmother. My grandmother was born in 1905. When she was born, 6% of Americans graduated from high school. It's not much. Most Americans lived on farms. There are still countries like this. Electricity and flush toilets were not taken for granted. People did not drive automobiles. There were no antibiotics. Any slight infection, you risked your whole life. There was no radio. Movies really had not yet come. That was in the 20s. If you look at every single area of her life, every area, within her first 50 years, for her, literally everything changed. She gets electricity, the flush toilet, automobile, antibiotics, radio, television, movies, airplanes. You could go on and on with a long list. Actually, in those 50 years, the computer was invented too. No, early computers are not very fast. So in her 50 years, the whole world changes. In my 50 years, I get like one great sector, and everything else is nicer and more comfortable. And that's the slowdown. Some of it is government regulation. Some of it, I think, is just progress comes in batches. It doesn't come evenly. Some periods are more dynamic than others. So like we have cars. It's not that easy to improve a car. Do we have flying cars? No. That's hard. You can get them to fly, but it's not cheap, and then it's really dangerous. We have private planes. They cost a lot. So we're still looking for ways to improve cars. You make the seats more comfortable. You make the music better. You have more computer controls. The brakes are so much better. These are all real gains. But it's like with cars, we've hit a temporary plateau, and the next big breakthrough has yet to come. And that's what I call the Great Stagnation. The United States has been living in the Great Stagnation, and yet somewhat arrogantly we still tell ourselves how innovative we are, and we always point to this one sector. Apple is great, I love Apple. But our problem is, not enough of our economy is like Apple. So growth in the US has slowed down. Growth in Europe has slowed down. If you look at Japan, for over 20 years, they've hardly had any growth. So what were the three main economic areas in the world? They were the US, Western Europe or Europe, and Japan. And over the last, depending where you look, 20 to 40 years, in all of those regions, growth has slowed down. That again is what I call the Great Stagnation. Now that said, there's a lot of good news in the world as a whole. Because even though America, Japan, Western Europe have slowed down, we all know there are plenty of countries which are growing much more rapidly. The most obvious example is China. Another important example is India. Those countries each have more than 1 billion people. So India had been growing at 8 to 9%, and China has had about 30 years of 10% growth. That's actually the greatest growth miracle in the history of the human race that we know of. 30 years running and about 10%. The world has never seen any economic progress come so quickly, much less for 1.3 billion people. So that's fantastic news. If you compare the gains of China, India, and other countries, those gains are more important than the problems in the West and in Japan. So overall, we should be optimists. But I still feel compelled to come here and report that the most economically important nations in the world have ground down to a lower rate, have seen a slowdown, have seen a stagnation. But to think about the global economy as a whole, here's what worries me. If you look at China and India and a lot of other countries, right now they seem to be slowing down also. So if you take the economy of India last year, it was growing at over 8%. And it was forecast to grow at something like 8.6%, which of course was great. India right now, less than a year later, it's growing at a bit above 6%. That's a big difference. When India grows less than 6%, it tends to lose its ability to elevate people out of poverty, because their problems are severe and they need a lot of growth just to keep their capital maintained, just to keep feeding people, just to take care of new population, to create new jobs. So if India is growing at 5%, maybe 5% sounds pretty good, but for India, 5% is somewhat problematic. So India, we have seen, is slowing down, and it's somewhat of a mystery why. It may or may not stay slow, but of course, if America, Western Europe, and Japan are all slow, and if the Eurozone is in a Great Depression, that doesn't really help India any. The other problem is China. Like I said, China had tremendous growth for 30 years. But it seems that China also is in the middle of a very serious slowdown. No one knows how much, but if you look at the last quarter, China's imports, how much China is buying from other places to build, to invest, to consume, those imports, they basically fell off the table. They plummeted. And that's the Chinese buyers saying, we think we're slowing down. Again, no one knows how much. The numbers which come out of China, you can't trust them. But it's very worrying when you have India and China slowing down at the same time. To take one more example, consider Brazil, the second biggest country in my part of the world. Brazil is 200 million people. It had been growing at rates of 7 to 9%. Again, fantastic news. Last year, what did Brazil grow at? 2.7%. Temporary? Permanent? We don't know. But again, with Brazil, you see the slowdown. So, again, I didn't plan to come here and be all pessimistic. But right now, actually is a very difficult time for the global economy. The advanced nations are finding it difficult to make further progress. And some of the star performers, unclear, but we're seeing signs of bad news. There are some economies which are not slowing down. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Turkey is still doing well. Mexico is doing well. Colombia and Latin America, they're doing well. So not everyone is slowing down, but the overall picture, I would say, is worrying. There's some countries which are speeding up. Pakistan, Philippines, they're speeding up. So there's some bright news. Those are large countries, they have a lot of people, they're very poor. But again, overall, I'm quite concerned. Now, I promised I would speak to you all about Romania. Let me just say, for the world as a whole, I actually really am an optimist. I'm not an optimist for the next 5 years, however. I'm a deep, dark, gloomy pessimist for the next 5 years, unless you live in the Philippines or Mexico. Then I'm an optimist. I'm very optimistic about Mexico, actually, but separate question. But I think what will happen over the next 20 years is that all of this stuff, iPhone, internet, communications, it will revolutionize the whole world much more than it already has. So the American arrogance is to think that this stuff has succeeded. From my point of view, this stuff is just beginning. This is in its infancy. What we do with the internet, I call the add-on approach. So you have a retail store. That's great. You take your store and you create a website for your store. Nice advance, we're all happy. Or you teach a class in person. But you create some new materials for the web, you add those on to your class. Your students watch a YouTube video. That's nice. Add-on approach. But the benefit of add-on is pretty small. We think we're so innovative because we do add-on. But the real value in new technology is not add-on, but total restructuring. So I think within 20 years, higher education will be totally restructured. Right now, the professor, like me, professor is the center, and you watch YouTube as the add-on. I think in 10 years, the internet will be the center, and the professor will be the add-on. In 10 years, the website for Mango, Banana Republic, Zara, whatever, the website will be the center, and the store will be the add-on. The store will never go away. You need the store. You need the salesperson. You need to feel, to touch, to just go there, you know, for fun, hang out with your friends, whatever. That's fine, that's great. But our economies will totally invert what is the core and what is the add-on. And the internet will move from being the add-on to being the core. And this, in my opinion, will bring huge gains, and the world will grow very rapidly over the course of 20 years, but not over the course of 5 years. The next 5 years I see is very painful for many, many places. But I promised you Romania. I'm no expert on Romania, and I really did not come here to lecture you about Romania. My knowledge of Romania, once you get past classical piano music, is small. I don't know a lot of recordings by Romanian musicians. It seems to me that all of you here, all of you that I've met, you're too pessimistic. So just as an outsider, without any serious knowledge of Romania, let me just present you with some brute facts that are reason for optimism. Like, just ask yourself a few basic questions. Over time, like take 2,000 years, take 1,000 years, whatever, have most regions gotten much better and much richer, or have they gotten worse? They've gotten better, right? This is not controversial. So there are bumps, there are ups and downs, but the overall progress, pretty much very positive. Take Romania in particular. Over the last 23 years, have things gotten better or have things gotten worse? I hope most of you in this room think that things have gotten better, in spite of all the problems. So the long-run global trend is positive. Your short-run local trend is quite positive. And then ask another very general question. Have societies in this world shown an ability to reform themselves when needed? That's tougher, because a lot of places haven't, but actually a lot of places have. And most of Europe has. So on that, it's a tougher call, but basically I want to call that one in favor of optimism. So I think when you look at like the big picture, progress is the default, a lot of progress in the last 23 years, and democratic societies have been able to reform themselves. I would say Romanians, I wouldn't quite say you should be staggeringly optimistic. It just seems to me you should be more optimistic than what I hear from the people I talk to. And it's interesting because the people I talk to, they have such a long list of reasons why they should be pessimistic. So they'll sit down, I'm the naive, underinformed outsider, and they will list 68 bad policies in Romania, which I have never even heard of. So I am in no position to rebut their particular arguments. I sit there, I nod, but you know, I think about it. The longer this list, I say, the more reason there is to be optimistic. Because this list, when I hear the list, it sounds bad, it sounds ugly. Maybe it is bad and ugly again, I don't know, I'm the outsider. But I hear the list and I know those are things you can change. And if you go back, you know, can democratic societies reform themselves? The longer the list, you're just telling me, here's all the more we can change. Because very little on the list, to me, sounds impossible to change. So I'm just telling you, my brute, uninformed impression is that Romanians possibly should be more optimistic. There are a lot of natural assets here. I would worry about the low birth rate, and I would worry about the fact that for the next 5 years, Europe will be in a Great Depression. Those are no jokes. I don't want to trivialize them. But still, if I look at long-run fundamentals, it seems to me there's a pretty strong case for maybe a cautious, maybe a moderate optimism, but nonetheless, quite a fair degree of optimism about Romania. In any case, I'm happy and honored to be here. Those are my formal remarks for now. I'll close with that, but I believe we have time for question and answer. And if you would prefer to ask in Romanian or some other language, I would encourage you to do so, and someone else can translate, so please feel free to speak up, and thank you all for coming. Yes, question.
What do you think comes next for employment patterns after white-collar jobs become automated or outsourced, for instance? What comes after that as the great employer?
I think a lot of automation will happen. But interestingly, it's automation which will prevent outsourcing. So if machines do a lot, there's no reason to send jobs to China, because machines in America, Europe, wherever, work as well and as cheaply as machines in China, arguably better so. So automation will prevent offshoring, but of course automation will destroy a lot of jobs. I think the jobs of the future will take a few main categories. One of them will be people who work with machines, people who program machines, people who maintain them, people who advance what the machines can do. So you can call those technical jobs. Not everyone will have the skill to fill them, but people who do, they will earn fantastic amounts. So I think, say, 25 years from now, some of the wealthier countries like America or Germany, I think you'll have 10–15% of the population basically being millionaires. And that will be something to see. Another set of jobs which is growing and will continue to grow are what are called personal service jobs. Classic example, teaching yoga, taking care of people, doing things that only human beings can do. There will be many more such jobs in the future. Some of them will be menial labor, like being a servant, like carrying someone's golf clubs. It won't all be fun, but a lot of them will be very creative, and a lot of them will pay pretty well, because there will be more resources, more money. So personal service jobs will see a lot of growth. And then finally, a huge growth sector is what I call marketing, but I mean that in a very general way. There'll be a lot of wealth, but what's really scarce today, especially with this stuff? Attention, right? You get a flood of email, there's Twitter, there's RSS feed, there's TV online. If you're working in the world as a professional, a flood of information which hits you, it's already overwhelming. It will become much more so 5–10 years from now. So getting people's attention is a skill which will increase in importance. So people will work very hard at simply trying to capture the attention of other people. Another growth sector will be what I call disciplinary jobs. That word may sound a little funny. But a lot of the problems of the wealthy countries right now, they're really problems of humanity. They're not problems of production. So like take healthcare. Right now there are several drugs for diabetes. They're not perfect, but if you have diabetes, if you have this illness, the drugs help you. But I asked some specialists, I said, how many people, this is Americans, like take all the right drugs when they ought to? And he said 20 or 30%. And people don't take the drugs when they're supposed to, they remain sick, they get worse. The problem there is not to invent a new drug, I mean that would be good, but the problem is just to get people to take the drugs and exercise the way they're supposed to now. And that's discipline. So I think we're going to see a lot of jobs, a lot of work, a lot of resources go into coaching, training, helping people discipline themselves. And that will be a bit like personal services, a bit like yoga teacher, a bit like professor. So the job market will change very rapidly. I think there'll be a phenomenal amount of automation. There'll be some big losers, but there'll still be a lot of jobs, and the people who are ready for that will do very well. That would be my answer. How it is in Romania, I couldn't say, because my sense of things here is much weaker. But that's an answer for the United States and the wealthier nations of Western Europe and Japan. Yes?
We already saw the reaction of the political system, economic system, when the financial system Greece in the fall of 2008, 2009. Why do you think that in Europe won't happen a similar response?
Well, Greece is very different from the rest of Europe. They had democracy only recently. They have a long history of being fairly extreme. They have a fairly long history of rioting and guerrilla warfare. There's something quite admirable about the Greek struggle for liberty, even in the 19th century. Lord Byron wrote about this. I don't mean to criticize the Greeks. And of course, Western ideas of liberty, the word Europe comes from Greece. But nonetheless, Greek culture, I think, is not well situated to really deal with the big financial crisis. If you look at most other European countries, there's much more unity, there's a much longer tradition of democracy, and I don't think you'll see, say, like the Golden Dawn Party in most of Western Europe. You may see it somewhere, but I think Western Europe will stay free. I think once it gets through the immediate crisis, it will make it come back. I look at the fundamentals. Western Europe, do they have good education? Do they have human capital? Do people there have good values? And it's not a simple story, but basically I think you have to say yes on all those areas. Think of Europe as mankind's greatest achievement. Why should we think that a currency area falling apart will threaten mankind's greatest achievement? So I worry about the low birth rate, but here's a way to put it. I don't see any problems with Europe which could not be solved by simply having more Europeans. So I'm cautiously optimistic once we get past the next 5 years. Yes?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the wonderful lecture. You said earlier that in the near future we would see the internet becoming the core and the store becoming the add-on.
For many things, not everything.
Yes, okay. So wouldn't the government try to regulate the internet? And if so, wouldn't this censor the internet and become abusive of our privacy? And if this is true, wouldn't this contradict your prediction about being optimistic about our freedom?
There's a few different questions in there. First, will government try to regulate the internet? It depends which government you mean. Of course, China does it now, North Korea and Cuba, they do it now. But in the United States, Western Europe, Japan, I don't think there'll be much regulation of the internet. There are pretty strong traditions of free speech. The internet will be taxed more. You'll pay more sales tax. But it won't really stop the internet. It will just slow it down a bit. And even in China, they can't regulate the internet that well. There's always a way around the regulations. So the internet is decentralized. I think it will mostly prove impossible to regulate. You ask about privacy. Of course, privacy is dead. I would say, at least in the United States, it's dead already. The funny thing is, people don't care. Facebook, Google, they know so much about you. I mean, they don't care. They just want the money. Maybe like somewhere in Google, there's a guy who like looks at your Google searches and he sees you like Googled some old girlfriend and he giggles. I don't know, but mostly they don't care and you don't care. Now, if you're a person who deeply cares about privacy, then I guess you shouldn't be an optimist, because your privacy will in fact be gone. And there will be these kind of social networks. You won't literally be forced to join them, but it will be hard to stay out of them, the way the world will work. And you will enter them, and you will give up a lot of your privacy. Like I find this now. Like I'll go places, in Washington, near where I live. Then I go home, I look on Twitter, and like people on Twitter report like that I showed up somewhere, or like, what I did or what I said or what I was wearing. And I don't mean a public appearance, I just mean like I go somewhere privately. And like it gets recorded. Facebook, all your photos, your friends, your drunken parties, whatever. So yeah, privacy's dead. If that crushes you, by all means be a pessimist. Most people I know don't really seem to care. There's a kind of protection that the privacy is so stripped away, there's such a mass of data, like the protection for your privacy now is just the sheer overwhelming mass of data. So I guess maybe that's not totally optimistic, but most people seem to prefer it. I only know a few who really are trying to hold their distance from it. Yes?
What do you think of France in the Eurozone and maybe
the new president of France, I don't think it matters. I think most French presidents tend to be quite alike. They come from broadly similar backgrounds with similar training and similar ideas. So Hollande said all kinds of things to make himself sound different. He's in office, he'll do more or less what Sarkozy did. No big change. France, their government spends too much money and their taxes are too high. And I hope they address that. The people who are pessimists about France, this is what they say. They say, like in Italy, people are really suspicious of the government, and they're a kind of natural libertarian. I agree with that. But in France, hardly anyone is a natural libertarian. People there tend to worship the idea of the state and the practice of government. And they're pretty far away from wanting to do good reforms. So there's a case for pessimism for France, but overall, it's a wealthy place, it's an educated place. They'll have a rough time now. But they've been through worse. I might be surprised if they didn't emerge more or less intact, albeit, with slow growth and a lot of inefficiency. Like my general rule is countries that have tended to do well in the past continue to do well. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a better guide, I think, than looking at like the crisis which is in the headlines today. And France has a long history, done a lot of good things, and I think with Germany's help, they'll make it through. It's still a high productivity country.
So,
Yes.
First, thank you for being here with us. Let's use the title of your presentation and to put a question like that. Is organized crime overtaking the global economy?
Organized crime?
Right.
Depends what country.
The global economy?
It depends what country you live in. In the United States, crime rates are falling quite rapidly, but in other places they're going up. So I would say it depends. The classic two-armed economist.
World Bank estimated between 2 and 10 trillions the turnover of organized crime around the world, which is quite scary. And the second question, an attack on Iran is a part of the solution or of the problem for the global economy? Thank you very much.
Those are tough questions. But I would say this. Organized crime is growing in some places, shrinking in others. It's shrinking in Sicily, for instance. It's arguably losing in Mexico. But organized crime has not prevented economic growth. So Hong Kong has organized crime, Japan has organized crime, India does. No one thinks this is good, but those countries have still seen a lot of growth. So I think we can live with current levels of organized crime, and even quite a bit more. Now you ask about an attack on Iran. I'm not at all an expert in this area, but my general view is that once a war starts, it's really very hard to control what will happen in any kind of positive or beneficial way. So I would be greatly worried if I saw that. It seems to me the chance of that happening has gone down in the last few months. Again, speaking really much as a non-expert in this area, I guess it still could happen, and that would make the problems I've talked about much worse, especially for a country like Italy. A country like Italy really depends a lot on energy imports, same with Greece. The United States could adjust better. In general, the New World is finding a lot of its own energy. In the long run, I'm quite bullish about the New World, including South America. I think South America is the overlooked, neglected growth miracle of the present and future. And one reason for that is just they have a lot of their own energy, and they're developing a middle class. So I do worry about Iran, but I don't think I have a really informed answer on your question. It's a worry. Yes.
Hello. I would address a question from the focal point, current focal point,
Sure.
and meaning the state. How do you vision the evolution of the public system and the state, taking especially consideration the evolution for the European Union, because I'm talking that ironically the European integration takes part more in the security defense area than on the economic dimension, and taking into consideration the economic dimension, I would like to see your vision regarding certain, you talked about South America, but how about Africa?
There's a few questions in there. Let me start by giving you a simple 5-word theory of the state in advanced Western democracies. My 5-word theory is, old people get their way. I've never seen much evidence against this theory. So I think the state of the future in America, Western Europe, like today, will spend more and more on old people, for better or worse. I don't think we will ever really cut those programs. I think think we will deregulate many other sectors of the economy, in essence, to afford paying more for the elderly. Old people vote, they vote on issues they care about. They're sort of smart enough to be cynical. You have idealistic young people locked into one party or the other, so their votes are automatic. But old people, you have to deliver the goods or they don't vote for you. So the state will become more and more the agent of the elderly, which will be a lot of inefficiency, but it also will spur the state to create a lot of wealth so it can transfer it to the elderly. I have mixed feelings about the whole picture, but that's my prediction. Now you asked me about Africa. Sorry. Yes?
I was talking also about Europe.
Same in Europe. We're all aging, most of our societies, right? Not Africa, but these are the advanced Western democracies plus Japan.
Would you see in the near future the evolution of the public system becoming just a mere agency for European integration?
I don't think there's any chance of that happening. I think the Eurozone mess has shown those countries cannot really agree on anything. They have no desire for a common electorate. There will be no Eurobond. I think in some ways they will move further apart. The dream of Schengen, if anything, is moving away. Currency integration is moving away. That's okay, you know. But without cultural and political integration, I don't think you can just force integration on people who've never voted for it, never really wanted it, don't necessarily trust each other. So I view that as almost a zero chance, even though in some ways it could be good. What?
Security integration. Because that's the fact what's going on now in Europe. And the problem is that people are less and less informed about that.
I don't know. I think Europe militarily is fairly secure. It will stay allied with the United States. No one's going to take it over. They can keep defense spending at a minimal level and still be safe, and they'll do it, basically to send more money to old people. But Africa, I think, is a totally different story. There you still have very high birth rates. There will be what's called a demographic dividend. The question is, will there be jobs for these people with fairly high productivity? There's some African nations like Ghana and Rwanda where I'm really pretty clearly optimistic. If you look at a lot of Central Africa, like Congo, I would say it seems pretty pessimistic. So I'm not sure there's one answer for Africa as a whole, but I'll say this, Africa now looks way better than Africa 10 years ago. So there's certainly grounds for optimism for much of Africa, not all of it. Yes?
I'll come back to your book. And I'd say that this is very, very persuasive and very elegantly put. Your arguments are very, I found myself resonating with many of your arguments. But when I finish the book, the basic question remains, for me at least, is whether we are talking about a great stagnation as a transitory phenomenon, or as something which will take longer, I don't know, decades or centuries. And I'm relating that to one comment on your blog. Someone was making something like estimates what would happen if the Egyptian civilization would have continued to grow for thousands of years at the current level, something which is impossible. So, in many ways, I believe that this is the basic question.
I agree. That's a very profound question. You know, we have a famous baseball athlete in my country. His name is Yogi Berra. And he had a saying. He said, predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. So when the stagnation will end or open up, I think really no one knows. And I have given you my best guess. But I do see in this sector a lot of unexploited ideas. And if you look at something like electricity, it took 40 years to really turn electricity to its full potential, or the automobile. You need to restructure many different institutions. And I see that restructuring starting. So I will say I'm optimistic. I can't prove it. I don't really have numbers or empirics. But I am of the view that we will exit the great stagnation within the next 20 years. But you're absolutely right that we don't know. And predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future. So we will see. Yes?
My question is about how do you see the connection between the Chinese policies to push capital toward the European market, which is also present in Romania, the intention at least, and it showed quite aggressive over the last year. How does this relate to the Chinese and the European economic slowdown? How do you think this will impact over the Europeans and especially over the Romanians?
It's a good question. The Chinese, by trying to keep their currency low, have helped keep the euro high, and that has made adjustment for the eurozone much more difficult. Because ideally, you would like the euro to fall in value and boost exports for the troubled countries. The euro has fallen somewhat. It was below 1.3, I think, yesterday. I'm not sure what it is today, but certainly it's down from its peak. For that to work for Europe, you would need like the euro and the dollar maybe to be at 1-to-1. And I think the eurozone will fall apart at the fringes before we get there. But that said, this whole Chinese policy, I think itself will fall apart. China is overextended. Its provincial debts are unreported and probably quite high. I think they have massive excess capacity. I view China as a classic illustration of what's called the Austrian theory of the business cycle, where they've had far too much investment and malinvestment driven by political forces, and a market correction is kicking in. And I think they will go from 10% growth to 4 to 5% growth, and have a lot of political problems along the way. And they won't really have the ability to do a lot of things they've been doing now. And so this worry is real, but I think it's taking care of itself in a somewhat ugly, brutalizing, bounce your head down the stairs, fall down the stairwell kind of way. So I don't worry about China. I worry about China being too weak, not being too strong. Look at it this way with China. How many times in the last century have they had a peaceful transition of power in that country? One. How many times since, say, the year 1700 have the Chinese made really good decisions? Well, recently, yes, but otherwise, there's 300-400 years of just one terrible decision after another. So to think somehow culturally they've turned all that around, and now they're like Japan writ large, to me that's unlikely. I don't know. I see a lot of instability there. I see a lot of problems. I don't worry about China as a big rival to the United States. I worry about a weak, kind of angry, wounded China more than anything. Yes?
I have a question. We hear in the public opinion, investors, academics, saying austerity doesn't work. The expenses goes down, but the GDP goes down as well. The GDP ratio remains high, and there is pain. Also, we hear the stimulus doesn't work. They're pumping money, and the unemployment remains very high, and we have a economic growth. Do you see that is this a great stagnation or a new depression, whatever you call it, after a weekend and after a credit binge as we had in the previous decade or 4 decades? And how do you see the role of credit in this stagnation?
Again, there are a few questions in there. You're talking about a stagnation as resulting from a credit binge, and that's true. But I would stress that a stagnation causes a credit binge. So we Americans, we expected our incomes to go up 3% a year. Suddenly it stopped happening, and so we borrowed more to maintain consumption. So the credit binge itself came from the stagnation. Now you also asked me about austerity. You said, does austerity work? Does stimulus work? I'd say in today's world, neither works. So if you take Greece or Spain, in my view, those countries are in an impossible position. It's like you're falling out of a building. You can flap your arms, you can sing a song. You can say it doesn't work, but it's not the right way to think about it. Places like Greece and Spain, the level of debt and the collapse of credit is so severe that I don't think any fiscal policy, whether Keynesian or austerity, whatever, I don't think any of it can work. So I wouldn't judge all of macroeconomics on the basis of what doesn't work for a person falling out of a tall building, trying to flap his arms to fly or something. And that's what we're seeing in Greece and Spain. So I think there literally is no solution. We'll need some kind of clean slate, which will be very painful. You know, I think for healthy nations under normal situations, austerity works great. It worked for Ireland in the 90s. It worked for Canada. It worked for New Zealand. There are many other examples when you have basic, you know, rule of law, stable credit markets, okay monetary policy. When austerity works fine, it works great. It doesn't mean it's going to work for Greece today. I think no way will it work. One more question, yes?
Do you think that in the near future we'll be witnessing the currency war between the dollar and the euro, to stimulate some kind of competitive devaluation? Is it feasible that the dollar and the euro will reach parity, like 1-to-1, like you said?
I don't know. You know, if I knew future exchange rates, I actually wouldn't be here. I'd be on my $1 billion yacht or something. But here's one remark or two. Go back to my 5-word theory of politics. Old people get their way, right? It's more true now than ever before. It wasn't true in 1900, but it's true now. There's more old people. What do old people think about inflation? Old people hate inflation. So it's somewhat of an oversimplification, but basically it's true. It cuts into their savings. Their benefits are indexed, but still they sort of worry they're not getting the full value back. So I think when you have a government ruled by old people, the rate of inflation will stay under control because they won't want high inflation. So the US now is 2% inflation approximately. For us to have a kind of currency war, we'd have to think about 4, 6, 8% inflation. And I just see the old people like raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm in charge. No. And you see it in Europe too. There's tight money in Europe. What will happen, you know, the weak countries will leave the euro. Probably in the short run, the euro will go down quite a bit. But once the weak countries are out, and the euro is like Germany, Austria, and Netherlands, it could be way stronger. You know, it could be at 1.7, 1.8. It could be the new Swiss franc. That would be like a new problem for Germany. So in the longer run, I think the euro could go way up. We'll see. I'm not on my $1 billion yacht, right? Anyway, I was told that was the last question. Those of you I didn't get to, I'll still be here at the reception. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Take care.